Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Rebell with Edelman. And over the next 45 minutes, we're going to take a dive into sponsored content / native advertising and what the impact is for all of you. In case you're not familiar with the format, basically it's a reinvention of, in some ways, of the advertorial, reinvention and a reimagining of product placement and sponsorships, where paid distribution of owned content that we are creating for our clients, sits very closely next to and often nearby earned editorial coverage. And it's certainly been a significant revenue stream for the media companies. And I have with me today three publishers that are all pioneering in different ways and at different points of their history in sponsored content. So what I'd like to do is ask each panelist to introduce his or herself and explain what you do in sponsored content / native advertising. And I'll start with Robin.
Hi, good morning. My name is Robin Riddle. First of all, I'd just like to say that I'm absolutely delighted that you're here. When Steve Rebell and I were first talking about this panel a couple of months ago, I didn't realize that I was going to be competing against the US national team in a knockout game.
I forgot to mention that I put up on the board there the score.
Yeah,
and,
if they score, can someone just shout?
Well, we'll update. One of us will update the board. Oh, well, I don't know. I'm assuming that if you're a human on Earth, you're going to hear what happened.
So the sheer fact that you're actually in this room, I'm extremely delighted about. So once again, thank you very much for being here. I currently work at the Wall Street Journal. I'm the global publisher of WSJ Custom Studios. Custom Studios is our in-house agency. And it's an agency which is set up to help clients around doing storytelling for their brands. That sounds very familiar, I'm sure, to a lot of you. And we've heard a lot of people talk about this particular issue over the last day and a half. So I've not been at the Journal very long, probably 15 months now. But before that, I was at The Economist for 15 years, which is another brand you may have heard of. Most recently, The Economist, I was the Vice President of Thought Leadership and Events, where I was running a team doing very, very similar things, telling stories around brands, but more in the thought leadership space. There's a couple of examples that I've got on the board just to sort of talk to you about, just to give you some idea of the kinds of work that we do at the Journal. And just to sort of pick up, I guess, also on something that Steve said, is that you know, for us, the idea that this is a sort of reinvention of the advertorial is maybe part of the story, but actually the space that we're working in is what I would describe more content marketing than custom publishing or advertorials. And what I mean by that is that clients are needing to tell stories around their brands for a few reasons, but primarily because I think that the way that we as people are consuming content has changed. And because of the way that we're changing our ways that we consume content, it's meaning that the job of the marketer has changed and communications is changing, right? And what I mean by that is that whereas before we used to have this kind of analogy of the funnel. We start at the top around sort of consideration and evaluation, and then we get people to trial and purchase our products and then become advocates. And I think that whole notion now is changing. And it's changing because people are able to do much more comprehensive research. So using social media to research particular choices that they want, asking people, going to Amazon and doing product reviews. So all this is happening. What it's meant is that there's an extended evaluation period where people, consumers, are going out there and looking for content about brands. And we've seen plenty of pieces of research that back this notion up, that individuals will go out and do a lot of the legwork themselves around investigating products and looking at different choices, comparing prices. And the research that I've seen says it's something like 60%. So people get themselves 60% of the way through the sales funnel before they engage with the brand's salespeople. So what that means is that when you're thinking from a brand's point of view about engaging people, you have to be able to engage people around not just the products that you're selling, but why your brand exists. So what is it that somebody is buying into when they buy your brand? What will it say about them as an individual consumer? That isn't advertising. And you might find that quite surprising that here I am as a media owner saying that the solution to the problem is not advertising. Now, I'm not saying to you that advertising is dead, far from it. I'd actually say that there's a stronger case than ever for good, effective brand advertising, because amongst all this clutter of content that you see out there, if consumers are not familiar with the brands, they're not going to engage with it. So you have to still start with creating a brand, but then underneath that, you have to be able to tell really good, engaging, original, informative content. There's a couple of examples that I've got up here of some work that we've done that might change your perspective on what the Wall Street Journal is as a media organization. This is content that we've produced for VMware. They came to us with this challenge around, they want to be seen as a thought leader around cloud against an audience of technology decision makers, so sort of CIOs, CTOs, that kind of area. Now, the interesting thing was that this is on their own blog. So this is not an ad campaign. And they came to us and said, we want you to produce some storytelling around the future issues of the cloud and position VMware as somebody that understands this space and is a thought leader. So we created a series of articles, first of all. Some of them were white label, meaning that we produced them under the client's brand. And some of them were co-branded, meaning that exactly that we're branding it as WSJ Custom Studios in association with VMware. And then from there, we produced some longer form storytelling around some SlideShare decks and some ebooks. So that gives you a good example of the kinds of work that we do now at the Journal.
Great.
That was quite an introduction. It's going to be tough to beat there. So my name is Sebastian Domich. There we go. I am the Vice President of Advertising at the New York Times, and I also lead our T-Brand Studios team, the rival on the street to Robin's Wall Street Journal Custom Studios team. I was at Forbes for the last 6 years, and basically the New York Times job was my dream job. And it kind of happened by chance. I think this whole evolution of brands becoming storytellers and then publishers creating the format for them to do it on their site created this great opportunity for me to move over and start this team. The New York Times role in the space, I think, is a little different. Coming from Forbes, we focused on creating a platform where brands could publish on the Forbes site. And the mantra behind that was that brands can become publishers with social media. They have thought leaders and domain expertise to be able to do this. And with the right tools, they can become leaders in the space and become thought leaders. But at the New York Times, it's a little different. We have an edited site. It's not so much a platform. It's about necessarily being a forum for, I would argue, some of the best journalism in the world. And to have a brand create content on the New York Times, there's a high responsibility with that. So basically, we went in saying, our bar for marketer content or brand storytelling isn't going to be other brand content. It's going to be comparable to New York Times content. So over the last 6 months, we've created the paid post platform, which I can tell you was not the easiest thing to get through our newsroom. It's an ad, a native ad platform on the New York Times site where brands can now publish with the help of our team. And then 3 months ago, we launched T-Brand Studios, which we've been pretty diligent about hiring for. We hired an editor that used to write for The Economist. He was an energy writer and sustainability writer at Business Week. And he sort of leads the charge on the new evolution of thought leadership. And then we hired a social media strategist from the Huffington Post. Her main role, and she actually authored this piece, which I'll go through shortly, is to how do we make the content sexy? How do we make it shareable? And then lastly, we hired a team of creatives from Slate and GQ, and the idea behind that is the stories that we tell for brands, it's not just about the story, it's about how they look, how they're visually appealing, and so forth. So this piece here for Netflix, when I pitched this team to hire the brand studio team, I talked about there's this basically hole in the industry or opportunity for brands to really go out and do something different. Not view this as necessarily content marketing, but great content where earned media capabilities can far surpass what they're paying for. And the only way that we were going to do that is gain reader interest. And we weren't talking about creating hubs or microsites. It was about creating one single piece of work that could sit side by side with New York Times editorial. And Netflix was probably the first opportunity that we had where we had a client. I will say it was a little bit of a layup. It's for the launch of the show Orange the New Black. The topic is interesting no matter what. It's not the same as VMware and talking about the cloud. I would say a little bit more interesting. But they came to us and we sat across the table and we went through famous New York Times stories. So I don't know, have any of you read Snowfall, Sharks and Minnows? So we went through all the different stories that we've put out and picked some of the favorite formats. And then we started talking about underlying themes of the show, like abandonment, companionship, women's femininity issues in prison. And we built out basically a storyline for some topics that we'd like to push forward with. And the interesting thing was that when a New York Times editor works with a New York Times journalist, they don't say, I want you to write about this topic and these 5 bullet points, I want you to cover all of this. They give them a topic and they go out and they cover it and they discover what are the most important issues surrounding that topic. So our team actually went out, Melanie, who came from the Huffington Post, our video editor, went out and toured these women's prisons and found there was deeper issues than just these sort of light touch topics. And one of the biggest ones was that we basically duplicated a men's and women's prison experience, and that's not very successful. And also that when women go to prison, it has huge impacts on the families. You're leaving children behind, they're usually the primary caretaker, and the stories that we found were incredible. So the team went out and produced this piece. It's about 1,500 words. It's arguably, in my eyes, probably the most investigative journalism that's happened with sponsored content or native advertising. And they delivered this piece on my desk, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. But the challenge is that content marketing, native advertising, whatever you call it, it's still advertising, and it has to work for the show. My big thing is, I don't care what anybody says. People don't like advertising. If you have a choice to have no advertising on your site, readers will choose no advertising. So Spotify Premium is premium because there's no ads. So my big thing is, if a reader comes to the page, there is no guarantee, I don't care how good the content is, that they're actually going to read it from start to finish. We had a great story, but I wanted a reader to be able to take something away with the visuals if they don't even enter the text. So our creative team went out and hired Otto. He was a cover artist from The New Yorker. He worked with our visual graphics team to basically build this experience that's themed after a famous New York Times article called Tomato Can Blues. So the idea is when you scroll down, some of the graphics will animate. And then the videos you'll see were a lot like Snowfall and Sharks and Minnows and some of the other famous pieces. So all said and done, this has been a huge success for us. The crowning moment, I'll say, is we got a note from the newsroom last week that said this was now showing up on their chart beat, and it was in the top 10 most read stories on our site. So this stuff can work. You can argue that it's great advertising promoting the show. Readers who love Orange is the New Black come out with a new angle about the topics around the show. And I would say people who don't enjoy the show are probably arguably more interested in discovering what the show's about now after reading this. So that was a long intro, too.
I think we're about even on that one.
Hello there. My name is Bamai Worley. I'm a brand strategist at Huffington Post. Really excited to be here as a former DePaul graduate in the PR field. So it's kind of full circle. I've been at the Huffington Post for just 2 months now, working on brand strategy, working with brands and our editorial team to find stories that they can align with and utilize our real-time success with. Previous to the Huffington Post, I worked at The Onion, where we helped create our in-house agency called Onion Labs, so helping make brands funny, essentially. But at Huffington Post, really kind of 2 groups. One is the branded content group, which I work within, and then closely with our native advertising team, Partner Studio. So it's Huffington Post Partner Studio. 2 different ways. I think when Huffington Post, first started 9 years ago, we started at the boom of when Facebook, LinkedIn, and so many technology sites, and we consider ourselves a journalistic enterprise as well as a technology platform. And the way we kind of talk about it is, we like to help brands kind of define their brand purpose beyond just advertising. So in the vein of what Huffington Post is all about, besides delivering real news, is we have a perspective. Ariana Huffington is not shy about some of the things we stand up for. We've won a Pulitzer Award for some of our work, which is pretty amazing for a digital media company who's never had a print edition or written edition. But we also work with brands to kind of craft kind of what we call infotainment. I think entertainment is great, like snackable native content. We have like around 8 different product offerings like that closely mimic a lot of what our real editorial looks like. And going back to Robin's point about how we consume media on the go. So kind of working with brands to figure out what their voice is. And I know this is something we always talk about. Tessa, who runs our Huffington Post Partner Studio, our native advertising, which we work really closely with, is we help brands make content that doesn't suck. So we, and I think these are kind of like our kind of tips for brands, like as they're kind of creating content, even publishers, like we talk a lot about this, about how we approach content is such a different way than just straight out advertising. So, a lot of it is like standing out, using different stats. As PR people, you guys can appreciate, pithy headlines are boss is like huge for us. Since we started as a technology platform, our social distribution went through Facebook, Twitter, so we marketed ourselves differently, and our distribution was so different. And we sit in the same building as Facebook. Some of our editors run up and down the stairs, as you know. We always call it art and science, because you can have great content, but if no one sees it, does it really matter? So they run up and down trying to figure out the algorithm. So if it's mentioning kale on a Tuesday, that's it. Like how do we get our content seen? So, yeah. So I
Great.
think these are kind of like useful tips.
Great. So, question on the revenue opportunity. How, in your respective organizations, how do you think does your management envision one day sponsored content, native advertising becoming an equal to display or your other advertising streams of revenue in your company?
Yes.
And if so,
I
how
hope
soon?
so.
And if so, how soon?
I hope so, because that means my team will grow. So it's tough to say how soon. I think the opportunity for publishers, no doubt, it's a new revenue stream. It's revenue that would probably go to social and ad tech if we weren't playing in the space. I think one of the figures I was looking at last year, brands spent something like $2.2 billion on social. This is our opportunity to get in there. And I think, Robin and I's studio's job is to basically work with these brands and say, it would perform better if you work with a publisher. You could do it on your own. You have all the tools on social media, but it works better when it comes from a publisher, and we can help authenticate it, provide the expertise. And from a revenue perspective, I can never quote on specific numbers.
Right.
I don't think that display or banner media will ever go away. I think it's critical for any type of program that's rooted in data and retargeting and customer acquisition. But I do think there will be a significant shift from storytelling-based advertising or awareness advertising to these more innovative formats, whether you call it native advertising or content marketing, as marketers start to realize the benefits of the earned media behind these programs. Because I think that's really what guides it all.
So can you double click into that, what you mean by the earned media behind the program?
So Netflix, I want to say right now, only about 20% of the audience that's going to these pages is coming through paid media. Goldman Sachs was our first, I would say, first big program of the year. Goldman Sachs is not the easiest program to get to trend in social media. I promise you that. More than 50% of the traffic came through earned. So the idea is that when you purchase one of these programs, you're going to work with our team. There'll be a production cost, and we'll create the body of work, and then there'll be an ad campaign surrounding it on the Times, which will use native advertising units, as we call them. But then the whole idea is that somehow either you've created a new conversation. You are so relevant in the moment. Orange is the New Black is a perfect example. We just launched the show, so we produce a piece of content that is arguably starting a new conversation. Social media picks it up. Readers are sharing it. That is all earned media. It's a huge incentive to start to create better advertising. So for banner media, there wasn't an incentive for publishers to necessarily build the most amazing content around it. The idea is just more page views, more banners. This now is all about, we want it to be the best performing product we can possibly put out. And the only thing that will guide that success is reader interest or earned media. Socials provide basically this barometer for success. And I think that we're like just at the beginning of brands realizing how much power they have with this. If you can tap into what's going on in culture and match it to some sort of brand objective, you have a massive opportunity.
And I would just say, starting off my career in like the media sales kind of atmosphere where we traditionally worked with agencies who were placing advertising dollars. When I worked at The Onion, that's where it kind of became just a bigger market because of the earned aspect of it. It wasn't enough to have someone like a brand page because, as you know, Facebook owns that information and they can control what you see and whatnot. But when we started in the last couple years is working with like PR and creative agencies because they understood the earned aspect and how to drive distribution. And Jonah Peretti, who's at BuzzFeed, who helped start Huffington Post, has this great quote that I always like to steal. Content is king, but distribution is the queen, and the queen wears the pants. And I think like PR agencies understand that. And like when we talk about like how we measure success, and it's all about the social actions. It's all about the shares, like how many people see our content and take action to it instead of just seeing an ad that's on a page that you may forget.
So let's talk for a second about who creates this content. All three of you have studios that create the content. So are there ever instances where agencies or the brand in-house team creates the content that goes on your site or co-creates it with you? I mean, I know that it's collaborative, but is there ever a situation where they say, you know what, thanks, we got it?
Ooh. So yes, a lot of brands are pretty sophisticated at this stuff. I would say, and the thing is, there's probably only about 20 to 25 of them. There's the Dell, SAP, Intel, Coke, MasterCard. They have these social command centers. They have editor-in-chiefs that are in-house. But the content they create is arguably sometimes it's very, very good. The idea, though, is that to perform well on our site, no one is going to know how to do that best than our team. And it does create a very interesting conversation with brands when they submit content to you. You've done a program, and you're going to be there. They're your client, and you've got to critique it. Very tough. And I've definitely been yelled at in the last 6 months numerous times. And no matter what, brands want to have the executive interview. My CEO wants to get his face on the page, something like that. And we know that that's not going to work. We love your CEO, but there's an ad unit for that. The three models that I've seen that have existed with brands right now is brands submit a piece of content, either they collaborate with you on a piece of content, or the ones that are really tapping into that earned media potential will just ride along with the themes that you pick. So you pick a theme that will aid their brand objectives, and I think GE is probably the best example of that. They do some incredible brand journalism. They're very good about allowing a publisher to basically create something that readers are interested in that supports their objectives.
To us, I think you've got our sort of starting point for this, it kind of links back to the question you asked before, is how big an opportunity is native? Now, to us, native is a relatively small opportunity. And the reason why we think like that is because the paid part of it is only a small component. So when a brand starts to think about what's the messaging that we've got and what's the storytelling that we want to do, they think about the different constituent parts of the distribution platform, so paid, earned, owned, and shared. So paid's only one part of that. So the native part of it to us is an important part, and it's quite clear that nobody's spending more on print advertising this year than they were last year, or very, very few people, and that trend's going to continue for the foreseeable future, forever, arguably. So it's quite clear that's not happening, but where we are seeing increases is in the kinds of campaigns that people want to run with us and the degree of customization that we want. So to start off with, it was just about alignment. It was about, I'm running a campaign on this and I want it to be next to some sort of editorial that's vaguely similar. Now they want, advertisers are demanding higher and higher levels of customization with the kinds of programs that we're creating. So that's a huge opportunity for us, and that's one of the key reasons why we did what we did with WSJ Studios, which, by the way, we've been in this marketplace since 1998. It's just that we called it a different name. It was actually under the Dow Jones name. And we were in that business primarily because we saw an opportunity around not taking advertising dollars off the table, which a lot of this conversation here really is about, but it's actually taking other budgets off the table. And that's where most of the work that I do is concerned. So actually a lot of the content that we produce doesn't end up on our platform, it ends up on a client's platform. So the idea of them coming to us saying we can produce our own content and there's no role in that for me. Like if they're already producing their content and running it on their own platform, then there's no role in that. They come to us because they don't have the time, they don't necessarily have the expertise, or they want a media owner that's used to producing content on a regular basis, engaging content on a regular basis, that's original, informative, and all the things that you want to do when you're creating good stories and getting engagement. So our clients have a capability, but when they can't fulfill it themselves, that's usually when they come to us in order to supplement their own capabilities.
So what I want to talk to you about next is disclosure and factors for success. So not for tweeting, but we have a study in the field right now in partnership with the IAB that is looking at how consumers perceive sponsored content and native advertising when they see it in the wild. It should be completed in the next month or so. So I'm curious what you are doing to ensure that this content is successful, particularly as it relates to the reader experience and disclosure.
I mean, I think anybody that's got a really strong media brand will all have the same approach to it. And I sat on the FTC Trade Commission panel on native advertising at the end of last year along with Steve. And what was interesting to me was it didn't matter where you came from in the industry, that pretty much everybody was saying the same thing, is that on this side, on the sell side of the industry, we all want very, very clear labeling. Now, there was some discrepancies in terms of where that labeling starts, but and somebody at one end of the scale would be somebody like myself, representing the journal, and no doubt you'd be probably similar to this, is that we want very clear labeling for sponsored content at the point where the user initially engages with that content. So when they first see that content, whether that be a link in social media, a paid link in social media, or it be an ad unit or a native unit or whatever it happens to be on a website, that the user can make a decision based upon the fact they understand the relationship between the brand and the media owner. In other words, somebody's paid for that content to be there. It's not organic content that's gone through the filtering process that the newsroom would automatically do, would naturally do with content in order for it to be displayed in the news well. And I think, we would probably be in agreement on that.
Yeah, I would say definitely. I think we try to make it a non-issue. It's called paid post. I think it's pretty clear that it's paid for. It says paid for and posted by at the top. I think that exactly like you said, brands have just as much as skin in the game as we do. No one wants to be tricked. I think that readers in general, I don't think they have an appetite for mediocre brand content. I think that's fairly annoying.
So does that mean you say no sometimes? You say,
absolutely.
we can't do that?
Absolutely. Like I said, when I get yelled at,
right?
That's when I get yelled at.
So are you finding that you may in the future say no more times than yes?
I have said no more times than yes, probably. And it's about educating them or brands just in general about the success that lies at the end of the road when you do it the right way. And again, it just comes down to the earned media conversation.
And just to add to that point, if our brand's on it, we retain editorial control. So yes, absolutely, we say no in certain instances. Now, clearly we're not in the business of saying no to clients. So there's somewhat of a sense of finesse around the way that you say it, but we're not in the business of producing crap content. We have our brand and our reputation. Now, whether that's on the newsroom side or the commercial side, it's the same brand that we share. So we have a duty to uphold the credibility and the status of that brand.
But Maya, did you want to add something? Or?
Yeah, disclosure is key. We absolutely do not do anything, that is not disclosed, and I think that's important. It's definitely a huge collaborative effort, as you guys all mentioned. More times than the table, we've had to say no, and we've had to work around that and produce better ideas. So I think it is a very delicate balance, and how we usually like to work with clients is start off from the beginning, just fresh brainstorm, collaborative, and there's a reason why they're going to the Huffington Post. They want that attribution. So you're paying a premium to have that audience and that scale and that voice. So I think it's important to really kind of honor that, because you're trying to kind of mimic it as closely as possible, and there's guidelines to that.
So one last question before I open it up to the group is, are you getting interest from students coming out of universities to join your studios and become branded content creators? Are students starting to see that as a career track, or anybody else for that matter?
So has anybody watched the show Girls? So the episode where she becomes a native ad writer for GQ had somehow had this huge ripple effect, and now we are now getting a ton of interest. So Melanie, who wrote the Orange is the New Black piece, is only 22. So she's a journalism student. I'll say I personally feel like the bar for talent in the media industry, on specifically the business side of the media industry, has risen substantially in the last 3 or 4 years. I think that everyone's starting to think like an editor. I almost want to exclusively hire graduates with journalism degrees. I'm just fascinated with their breadth of knowledge. You know, our lead editor that we brought on to run the studio, you know, he used to be an energy writer for Business Week. When I bring him on a sales call for an energy company, they're blown away by the knowledge that he has in the industry. If I could duplicate that across every vertical, our success would be immense. I'm really excited, I think, for the job prospects for graduates now, specifically with a journalism degree. I think that there's just, it could be, sounds like a tweet right here, like a journalism degree is the new marketing degree. I think that they're...
Does that have a TM after it?
Yes, at Seb Tomich. So, yeah, I'm seeing a lot of interest. You know, there is obviously going to be that, like, am I going to the dark side? You know, I can't speak for the newsroom on that, on their feelings about, you know, writers writing native ads, but I think that, you know, as we get better about this and it becomes more of a conversation of creating great content rather than just advertorial, I think we're going to get a lot more interest.
This topic has a lot of questions, I know. So
I was going to say, it
I'm
probably
sorry.
started when 5 years ago I started seeing Facebook and LinkedIn or in Twitter as skill sets on resumes. You know, like people are starting to think of like the way they push out content like differently, and I think, you know, there's a skill set there that, you know, it's endemic. They're digital natives. They understand how they consume media and push it out. So,
and I would like to see it on the agency side too. I think that, you know, as a buyer of these types of programs, if they understand content strategy, I mean, I would like to see PR companies, agencies more in the mix. You know, as a buyer of these programs, the ability to evaluate the earned media potential or the strength of the content, I think could be critical. And right now there's a huge lack of that going on.
So this topic has a lot of questions typically, so I want to open it up to the floor. Yes.
Playing off the transparency and disclosure issue, I understand the nice separation of church and state, but if you take it up an extra notch, what if the native advertising aspect of the organization there is going to get negative press in some other issue? How do you reconcile some of these things, and what does that mean for you and for readers, credibility of the publication?
Touch wood, we haven't had one, but it's coming. I think the reality is that we all accept that once you get into that situation where you are creating things for a client as a result of a marketing brief, it's different than producing things from an editorial point of view. And we go to great pains to say that. You know, all of the content is clearly labeled, that it wasn't created by the newsroom. So inevitably there will be a situation, and I don't know what it is, but I know that it will come. And, you know, if we get into a situation where, you know, we're asked to write things about, you know, the oil industry, that's a potential red flag. If we're asked to write about fracking for the Gas Association, that's a potential red flag. So we have to be careful. And there are examples out there. I'm not going to mention it because we talked about it to death last year, but, you know, you only need to look around the web to see examples where people have done this and got themselves into trouble last year. So it's an issue that we're acutely aware of. And I think that the way you solve it is by being aware of it and just trying to be proactive in terms of thinking through, my brand is connected to this. Is this something that, as a brand, whichever side of the business that it comes from, that we would stand by? And I think if you apply that kind of thinking to it, hopefully it should alleviate some of those problems.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think going to the labeling, this whole conversation started after that Scientology piece on The Atlantic. I would argue that the labeling on that piece was pretty strong. It was just a really bad piece of content. I don't think that native advertising or content marketing is a conflict between church and state. I think it's arguably as clear as it's going to get. I think that the media industry in general doesn't seem to have a really good knowledge of the mechanics of the advertising business. They're really good talking about media companies, but not the ad business. And native ads, you've got clear differentiation between our studio groups and our newsroom teams. Now, there is an issue in broader publishing about dubious adjacencies and, contributors writing under the guise of publications and, they're writing at the on behalf of a brand or something like that and not labeling. And I think there's issues with that. But I don't think that native is really causing that much conflict with this. And I think arguably the biggest critic in the industry I always see is Andrew Sullivan. Anytime we do a piece, he always just rips us apart. I remember 2 or 3 years ago when he was writing at Daily Beast, he wrote this whole column about why he started his new site. He said that his editor would come to him and say, hey, I need 20 million more page views, churn out a list or a photo gallery. And that, to me, is an issue about degrading editorial. And if we have an ad revenue stream that's not about how many page views we can generate, it's about the quality of the brand's advertising, that's an opportunity for me for journalism to improve.
Yeah.
There's a question over here.
So I want to congratulate the Wall Street Journal and New York Times for curating really great paid audiences. And we know that internet-wide CPMs are really low. Are either of you willing to talk about how high these packages can go that you're selling? I heard that in the Wall Street Journal, some CPMs are above $100.
Which clients are paying that?
All of them.
The pricing is an interesting topic on here.
I mean, that was one of the things that originally we were going to discuss. I mean, clearly pricing is not something that we want to talk about in the public domain because there are private conversations between individual negotiations and all that kind of stuff. But, what I can say is that, at a macro view, the industry is going one or two ways. It's either segmenting by your ability to deliver a niche audience, i.e. the kinds of audiences that our two publications can aggregate across the various platforms, or it's going scale. And on scale, it's all about programmatic, and that's a race to the bottom. That's about algorithms trading things way quicker than we can think as humans. And I think that's a natural thing that was always going to happen in digital. When I ran digital sales for The Economist in San Francisco 5 or 6 years ago, it was pretty clear to me that the amount of value that we as humans were placing in that buying and selling was so minimal that it was incredible that we were even doing it. I mean, basically, we were exchanging spreadsheets and various other different forms of communication to basically try and trade some digital impressions. And it seemed to me that the whole thing would be better suited to some computer somewhere doing it because we really weren't adding any value to that. And that really is then a case of the market will find its own level. And I think it's well publicized that CPMs are being depressed as a result of programmatic buying. For us, being able to aggregate a niche audience, what we're doing is trying to push upstream. So push upstream in terms of the way that we're able to sell highly customized packages and advertising programs and whatever else to clients against a very specific brief. And the hope is that we can do that and increase the value, so to speak.
I think we have time for one more question. Evan? I'm going to go to my alma mater, sorry.
See, I always wonder this. I wonder if younger audiences even care. Yeah, I mean, there was some recent study that I can't remember which one it was. It was talking about how people under the age of 22 now, they don't have the term sellout in their vocabulary anymore. Like brands, it doesn't matter. Like who cares what brand they consume? Content is content. It doesn't matter who it comes from.
Maya, do you have anything on that one? Or?
We always talk about like our generation, our audience is pretty young. You know, when we talk about them, we talk, they want the candy and the vegetables. You know, it's all part of their media diet. Like they may come to us for Kardashians, but they'll stay for Obama or vice versa. You know, so it's all in that like big, like scale is how we see our audience. So.
Just one very, very quick point just on that. So at the FTC hearing that you and I sat on, there was an interesting presentation from a professor from San Francisco, and they did some research very cleverly before they came out, and they asked people, do you understand what the term sponsored content means? And the majority of people said no, they didn't. And then they asked them whether they cared, and even more of them said no, they didn't care.
Yeah.
And we'll have more on that in a study that's coming out, like I said, next month. So I want to thank my panelists for coming, and thank you for your questions.
Thank you.
Thanks.